From Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols, How the True World Finally Became a Fiction. A very short reading, just barely more than one page, but one of the richest short readings in the entire history of philosophy. And it is about the history of philosophy. As a commentary on the history of philosophy goes, I'm not sure it's all that impressive. It is dealing with some caricatures of different perspectives in the history of philosophy, and may not be entirely accurate. It does draw out some themes that are really there in the history of philosophy. I love this passage, not for the accuracy of its commentary on the history of philosophy, but because it is itself such a beautiful piece of the history of philosophy. Let's look at what he says. He says, well, there are 6 sections to How the True World Finally Became a Fiction. Note the subtitle, The History of an Error. How the True World Finally Became a Fiction. The first section. The true world, attainable for the wise, the devout, the virtuous, they live in it, they are it. And then parenthetically Nietzsche says, oldest form of the idea. Relatively clever, simple, convincing. Paraphrase of the assertion, I, Plato, am the truth. In other words, the first chapter in the history of philosophy Nietzsche is commenting on here is Plato, where he talks about the true world, the higher reality, the ultimate reality, which is non-physical and beyond this world, beyond our perceptions, known only through the mind, not through the body. This world is the true world according to Plato. And how do you get to it? By being wise, devout, virtuous, by thinking very highly of yourself, by acting like Plato. And the true world becomes shorthand for I, Plato, am so awesome. I, Plato, can know the truth. Plato has some respect for himself, at least. Nietzsche is going to dislike the next stage in the history of philosophy even more than Plato, I believe. The next stage, section 2, the true world, unattainable for now, but promised to the wise, the devout, the virtuous, to the sinner who does penance. Parenthetically, progress of the idea. It becomes more refined, more devious, more mystified. It becomes woman. It becomes Christian. Second stage, Christianity. Or perhaps the medieval era of Christian philosophy. Or maybe it's better to just say the whole Christian culture that dominates Europe from, roughly 200, 300 AD, somewhere around then, until roughly late Enlightenment era. And in this cultural context, the idea of the true world is an idea of God, an idea of heaven, or an idea of the kingdom of God, which is understood in non-physical terms, which is beyond this world, beyond this life, and attainable not for the person who, like Plato, actually has some respect for himself, but attainable for the sinner who repents. In other words, we've moved from a denial of life with Plato, but a sort of affirmation of oneself, to a denial of life with Christianity accompanied by a denial of oneself. And things don't get better from here. Next stage is Kant. Section 3, the true world, unattainable, unprovable, unpromisable, but a consolation, an obligation, an imperative, merely by virtue of being thought. The old sun, basically, but glimpsed through fog and skepticism, says Nietzsche, parenthetically. The idea becomes sublime, pallid, Nordic, Königsbergian. Königsbergian means he's talking about Kant. Königsberg is where Kant is from. Note also the word imperative. He's referencing Kant's categorical imperative. The true world, unattainable, unprovable, unpromisable, this is what Kant said about the ultimate reality. The higher reality is non-physical reality. The ultimate reality, as the Christian said, is God and the soul. That's the Augustinian version anyway. And in Kant, we have a very similar picture. There is an immaterial soul, a non-physical soul. There is God. There is life after death. In many respects, it's very similar to Christianity and to Plato. These are, of course, non-physical things. They exist beyond the physical world of our perceptions. But in Kant, you can't know them. You can't attain to them, at least not in this life. There's no attaining. There's no proof. There's no promise. Unattainable, unprovable, unpromisable, and yet a consolation, an obligation, an imperative, merely by virtue of being thought, merely by virtue of being thought, we are able, the ideas are able to inspire in us an obligation, an imperative, and a consolation. In morality, in Kant, the idea of God and the soul become necessary accoutrements to morality. Or maybe I'm interpreting Kant improperly here when I say it that way. Let me try saying this. They become the foundation of morality, the idea of a non-physical human soul which is not controlled by matter and therefore is free to make its own decisions. It's necessary for the idea of free will to work, which is necessary for the idea of morality. That's a Kantian perspective. But you can't prove any of these things. You just have to believe them. Meanwhile, the idea of God beyond this world is a consolation in morality. The next stage describes the effects of Kant. Nietzsche says, section 4 now, the true world, unattainable, in any case unattained, and if it is unattained, it is also unknown. And hence it is not consoling, redeeming, or obligating either. To what could something unknown obligate us? Parenthetically, he says, grey dawn, first yawnings of reason, rooster's crow of positivism. This is the effects of Kant. If the true world is not attainable, then, and if it is not attained, then it is unknown. And how can something unknown produce in us any kind of an obligation? This is not the foundation of morality. In fact, what we should do is recognize that if Kant is correct about the true world, the higher reality, being unknowable, then we should conclude this is actually exactly what Kant does not say it is. Exactly what Kant says it is not. The true world is not a source of obligation. This higher world is not the foundation of morality. What we should do is break free of this idea. And that's where we go with the next section, section 5. The true world. An idea with no use anymore, no longer even obligating. An idea become useless, superfluous, hence a refuted idea. Let's do away with it. Parenthetically. Bright day, breakfast, return of good sense and cheerfulness. Plato blushes. Pandemonium of all free spirits. So many references. Pandemonium of all free spirits. This appears to be a reference to Paradise Lost. Milton's Paradise Lost. Plato blushes. Oh, that's a reference to characters in Plato blushing when they get thoroughly refuted by Socrates. Oh, the reference to the sun earlier was a reference to Plato's cave analogy and analogy of the sun in the middle books of Plato's Republic, where the sun is a symbol for the higher world. But in fact, with the realization that the old Platonic sun is now veiled in Kantian clouds, glimpsed through fog and skepticism back in section 3, and therefore useless for us, section 4. Now, section 5, Nietzsche says, just throw out the whole thing, throw out the whole idea, and then realize this world is real. This is where we have sunlight. Take it literally and metaphorically. This is the world of the sun. This is the true world. Bright day, breakfast, good sense, cheerfulness, free spirits. This is a good thing. Getting rid of the idea of the higher world means the higher world having become useless, since it's unknown and unattainable, gets thrown out, and we are free of it, and we're free to enjoy life in this world and to affirm life in this world. Section 6. We have done away with the true world. What world is left over? The apparent one, maybe? But no, along with the true world, we have also done away with the apparent. Parenthetically, Nietzsche says, midnight, moment of the shortest shadow, end of the longest error, high point of humanity, incipit Zarathustra. Now, this might sound like a very depressing take on things. It might sound like he's saying, well, we've thrown out the true world. We had the Platonic version, the Christian version, the Kantian version, then we realized the effects of Kant. It's unattainable, unattained, therefore it's not a consolation, it's not a source of redemption or obligation. Something unknown doesn't obligate us. Therefore, let's throw it out and be free. And then Nietzsche says, we've done away with the true world, but world is left over. Not the apparent world, the world we experience, the world of our senses, the physical world, this world. Not this world. No, we've tossed out the apparent world with the true world. This might be taken to be a very depressing conclusion, perhaps a statement of nihilism. Nietzsche has said, or so we might interpret him, Nietzsche has said, we've tossed out all source of meaning, because all source of meaning was in reference to the higher reality, the true world. But in fact, I think that's exactly what we're not supposed to do. Nietzsche's not telling us, oh, now you have to be depressed because there's no purpose in life anymore. He's telling you, you have a very heavy responsibility now to create the purpose of life. What we have done away with is not the reality or the importance or the seriousness of this world. What we have done away with is its definition as a mere illusion, a mere apparent world. In the old distinction between the true higher world and the lower physical world. We have an idea of a true reality and an apparent reality, a real world and an illusory world. And in doing away with the whole real world concept, we've just been left with this lower thing, which, now that we are not making a distinction between true and apparent world, can no longer be called the apparent world. That doesn't mean, though, that it's not a world at all. We're not doing away with the whole world. We're doing away with the idea that it's a merely apparent world. It is a merely illusory world. We're doing away with that notion, and now we're left with the idea of just the world. This is the world. Hence, midday, moment of the shortest shadow, end of the longest error, the high point of humanity. Incipit Zarathustra, the beginning, the entrance of Zarathustra. Zarathustra is Nietzsche's character, to keep it very brief, Nietzsche's character in his great work of literature, Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra proclaims that we have killed God, not literally, but the idea of God is no longer culturally useful for us, and now we have to be responsible for creating meaning in the world without reference to God. And Zarathustra might be taken as himself the character who is, in Nietzschean terminology, the overman, the new humanity, or the replacement for humanity, the new way of being human, the person who creates his own meaning in life, having done away with all these ideas, like the idea of the true world, that prevent us from affirming this life and affirming ourselves in this world. Zarathustra might be taken that way, and he might be taken as a representative for Nietzsche. I'm inclined to a more cautious reading. I tend to think of Nietzsche as pointing in this direction, but not himself calling himself the overman. I think maybe even Zarathustra himself is not proclaiming himself to be the overman. So it might be that this is not this midday moment of the shortest shadow, end of the longest error, high point of humanity. It might be that this is not the time when Nietzsche comes forth and proclaims, now I will show you the better way. I think he's now telling you, now humanity, being free of this ancient error, must itself create its own way. He's not pointing to himself. He's pointing to the future and to what we have to do in the future.